The results of an independent autopsy into the death of George Floyd were released Monday. The family's attorney, Benjamin Crump, said it found Floyd's death was caused by, quote, asphyxia from sustained forceful pressure. Meanwhile, the former Minneapolis police officer charged in Floyd's death was set to appear in court this afternoon. That has been postponed to next week due to coronavirus concerns. Derek Chauvin is charged with third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. Those charges stem from an incident last week where Chauvin was recorded with his knee pressed into Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes. Floyd became unresponsive and was later pronounced dead. George Floyd's death sparked protests in Minneapolis and in at least 74 other cities across the country, all of which erupted this weekend. Curfews are now in effect for a number of major cities. At least 26 states, plus Washington, D.C., have deployed the National Guard. In a call on Monday with some of the nation's governors, President Trump called them, quote, weak, and urged them to subdue protesters by force.
You have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. They're going to run over you. You're going to look like a bunch of jerks. You have to dominate. And you have to arrest people, and you have to try people. And they have to go to jail for long periods of time. It's happened before. It's happened numerous times. And the only time it's successful is when you're weak. And most of you are weak.
Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison joins me now. Thanks very much for being with us, Mr. Attorney General. I want to start by getting your reaction to the independent autopsy results released today. A lawyer for George Floyd's family says it found he died from, quote, asphyxia due to neck and back compression that led to a lack of blood flow to the brain. Does that change how Derek Chauvin should be prosecuted?
You know, at this point, it's not proper for me to comment on the evidence. We have been in touch with Mr. Crump. We're receiving a copy of this autopsy. It is important information. We take it very seriously, and we will factor it in. All the information we can get our hands on, we want to use that. We are taking a fresh look at the charges, at the evidence, and at any individual who we may or may not eventually also include as a defendant in this case. So it's important and it's influential, clearly, but I really can't assign the weight to it because I haven't read it myself, and neither has my staff. So we're arranging to get a copy, and when we review it, we will factor it into our calculations.
Let me just follow up, because as you know, there are calls for the other 3 police officers involved in George Floyd's arrest and subsequent death to also face charges. Do you anticipate that will happen?
Certainly is on the table. Let me be clear. It is very important that I protect this prosecution, meaning that I don't want anybody to say that there was a rush to judgment or that the charges are the product of public pressure. I need to be able to say that based on the facts and the behavior of the individuals involved and the law, that these charges are just and are fair and are right. What I am sharing with you and everybody else is that they can count on me to hold people to maximum accountability based on the available charges and the facts that exist in the case. With neither fear or favor, we are going to hold people accountable and get justice for this victim, Mr. George Floyd.
You know, this question of accountability, when people see that video, for some, it is clear. But could you talk about some of the unique challenges prosecuting police officers in particular pose?
Well, these cases have some challenges, right? I mean, look at the Freddie Gray case. Nobody eventually got convicted of that. If you look at the Walter Scott case, even Philando Castile a few years ago here in Minnesota, and I'm old enough to remember the Rodney King case where there was an acquittal in that Simi Valley jury on the first round. These cases are not easy. I know people look at the video and they're like, what's the problem? Charge him. You know, it's simple. We see it. But by time an experienced defense attorney gets a hold of this case, they begin to look for any crack that they can, and they are experienced at trying to raise doubts. That means we have to be prepared. That means we have to work very hard and make certain that we have an airtight, ironclad case, and that takes preparation. So I'm asking for folks who have invested their trust in me to conduct this prosecution, to allow me to do the kind of preparation that will give them long-term satisfaction that justice was done, as opposed to short-term promises about who's going to be charged and with what. We are working expeditiously, as fast as we can, but we have a duty to be fair, and we're going to be fair. But let me tell you, my eyes work pretty well. I saw what everybody saw, and I am committed to justice in this case.
So what do you say to someone who says, if that's the case and these challenges are so great, does that reflect a problem here, a weakness in our criminal justice system when it comes to protecting African-American and particularly African-American men?
Yes, absolutely. That is true. I would agree with that. There's no doubt about it. You know, our criminal justice system is used as a system of social control so often. If you just look at the drug laws, blacks and whites use marijuana at the exact same rate, and blacks are arrested way more, go to prison way more. And now that the country is saying we're going to go into the cannabis business, very few African Americans are even allowed to participate in that industry. So yeah, injustice is been a hallmark of our criminal justice system as it relates to African Americans. But I'd also add other peoples of color, poor white people. We fund prosecution. We don't fund public defense systems all over the country. This is a very serious problem, and it contributes to the rage and anger that we see all across our country. And I think that we can.
Is that something you can help address, Mr. Attorney General?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing is justice for Mr. George Floyd. That's what we've got to do. That is job number one. But that will not bring us to justice. We've got to have, in every state, city, and in the federal government, we've got to have a deep-seated analysis of how we make this society truly just. I will say that the federal government under President Trump has not brought a single pattern and practice lawsuit against a single municipality. And President Obama did, but even he tried to roll those back when he came into office. We need the federal government as a partner, and I'm urging them to step up and look at this particular crisis as an opportunity to do the right thing.
You mentioned the president. I also want to ask you about comments that he made. What is your reaction to his call for governors and law enforcement to, quote, dominate protesters?
I think this attitude and spirit of domination is exactly what has sparked the problem. The fact that, Mr. George Floyd was not talked to, according to the complaint, they walked up to the car with a gun drawn, and even though he was suspected, never convicted of a nonviolent offense. And then, I think that, that is the heart of the problem. It doesn't work. In fact, it has caused protests all over the United States and all over this world. It causes civil judgments for cities. It causes loss of life, injury, distrust of law enforcement. And low-income communities need law enforcement. They are so often the greatest victims of criminal action. So we need a trusting relationship with law enforcement, but we don't have one because of this attitude of domination. I think the president is incorrect, desperately so.
The president has asserted that many of the protesters are members of Antifa. Do you agree with that assessment?
We have no evidence that that is true at all. We do have evidence that people who are not in any way supportive of the protest for justice for George Floyd are actually at work committing acts of arson. We've seen them on tape. They've been confronted by some of the legitimate protesters, but where they come from and what their ideology is premature. Nobody really knows that, and it's irresponsible to jump to conclusions before we have evidence.
I do want to ask about 2018, when you faced criticism for tweeting a photo of yourself holding the Antifa anti-fascist handbook. Has your opinion of the Antifa movement changed since you became Minnesota's Attorney General?
The first time I ever heard the word is when Trump said it. I walked into a bookstore and thought it was funny that I just heard Trump mention it, and here's a book that is right there with the name on it. So I thought it was actually funny, and I didn't think it would be nearly the thing that the people, for political reasons, want to try to push. It's a photo. It was meant to not be even a serious thing, but yet in American politics, anything and everything somebody can use to try to discredit you, they do. So that's just the way it is.
All right, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. Mr. Ellison, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.